Okay, breathe. I live and I work in Red Hook. I'm a Sandy survivor so far. I'm surviving with these cards, and I apologize for that, but this is what will keep me from being here for 4 hours. So, I say so far because in spite of all of the money that has been raised and appropriated for relief, the truth is that thousands of us are still treading water. What very few people realize is that very little of the actual money ever raised actually gets to the victims of a disaster, and that's why I'm here today. The truth is, we weren't really worried about Sandy and Red Hook. We flood regularly. We sat down with wine and games. We were ready to watch it with our friends through our window. Around 7 o'clock, a neighbor knocked on our door and told us the water was coming. We went out and we looked down Pioneer Street. And we saw water coming down the street. It was quiet and it was calm. It wasn't really raining either. There was a light drizzle and a mist and just a little bit of wind. If you've ever left your sink on and the water overflows onto the counter in your kitchen, there aren't waves, there aren't ripples, it's just quietly, quickly filling all of the spaces that are available. That's what it was like watching the street fill up. When it reached our first step, we went upstairs and we watched outside of our window, and we just watched Van Brunt Street fill up like a bathtub. That's when we remembered the chickens. Our neighbor was keeping her chickens in our garden, and we knew we had to get to them. We went downstairs, and the water was already up to our rib cage. We waited in the dark, and we found the chicken coop. It was floating. Just one little corner of it was still above the water. The chickens were all on their perch together, tightly in the little corner, completely silent. As if they ignored what was happening, it would all go away. I wish that had worked. So anyway, we took the chickens, we carried them upstairs, and they lived in our house with our cats for a week. That was the fun part of Sandy. The next day, the water receded from the streets, and our basements were still filled to the ceilings. Most of our first floors took on between 3 and 4 feet. Even the heaviest of objects, like a giant refrigerator or kegerator, is going to float if there's any air in it. So nothing was where we'd left it the night before, and everything was a huge mess. As we started to gather and check in on one another, I started to see in the faces of a couple of my neighbors a look of defeat. It wasn't so much overwhelm at all there was to do. It was more the questioning whether they could do it at all. That's when I knew we needed to organize. We knew that each of us working on our own, isolated and overwhelmed, wouldn't be able to build back, but that maybe if we worked together, one another as a community, we could build one another back. By the end of the week, Restore Red Hook was founded. Our goal was to get each small business reopened again. We understood that in Red Hook, if the small businesses couldn't reopen, the damage to the community would be far greater than the damage to the individual businesses. Basic services like groceries and all the local jobs would be lost. We didn't have milk in Red Hook for a month, and we didn't have green vegetables for another 6 months. I've spent the greater part of the last 14 months learning about aid, and primarily how the disaster aid paradigm is broken. This is how it currently works. Disaster occurs. Pictures and stories spread through the media, and individuals respond. Millions of people give millions of dollars to help the people that they saw in the pictures. They give to large organizations. The large organizations then get grant proposals from the smaller organizations. The money gets redistributed from one group to another group, sometimes several times over. Most groups will deduct administrative fees and organizational costs and overhead from the top right from the beginning. Most will hire additional staff, everything from consultants to project coordinators. All of the groups will put together programs. The programs can be anything from buying food and blankets to creating murals and art projects, and most things in between. Very, very rarely is cash ever given directly to the people who are affected in a disaster. Recently, a year after the storm, a generous grant became available as part of Sandy Relief. It's actually one of the best programs I've seen all year long. It's for storefront facade improvement, and it can only be used for that purpose. So what it means is we can paint, we can get new lights on our outside, we can get new signage, anything that we want to improve the storefront facade. But unfortunately, it's not really what we need, and certainly not what we need in response to Sandy. In our case specifically, we need to replace our heating and HVAC system. We still need to pay off about $8,000 in electrician bills. We need to replace some of the equipment that's still missing, like some of those floating refrigerators. We can't do any of that. We also can't apply any of the grant to any of the debt that's incurred for work that we've already done. And let me just say, nobody waited a year to start rebuilding. So We have this amazing grant, but it's a year after the storm. The city is paying a fortune to administer it. They brought in consultants, architects, engineers. It will all go under Sandy relief. But it's not really what's needed most, and it isn't coming when it was needed most. This isn't about the flaws of any one specific program, no matter how well intended. This is about hundreds of similar examples over and over again that we've all experienced this year. This is about a system that is broken. Over the year, I began to see aid in this visual. We're talking about weather and rain, so imagine lots and lots of heavy, heavy rain. That's the money. And then there's this huge, huge, dry, bone-dry sponge that is absorbing all of that. And then underneath it, a few drops from the saturation points come through. Those drops are what are getting to the actual people who actually lost their homes and their businesses and their livelihoods. So, more money is spent on creating and administering programs than ever actually reaches the people involved in the pictures, the people whose homes and businesses were destroyed. Just to be clear, I really do understand the need for administrative costs and overhead. I have no question about it. I know as a volunteer who's run this organization all year how nice it would have been to have somebody paid to do that job. But I also think that a disaster is not time for business as usual. Disaster aid requires a different model. The new model is surprisingly simple. If we'd had immediate direct access to funds and resources, the story would be done. We would have cleaned up, rebuilt, got the community back on its feet again, and gone on with our lives. The hard part of that story is it also would have cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars less, and we would have recovered in a fraction of the time. What we end up finding is that most people recover because they manage to cobble together resources on their own. And if they don't have that, if they can't put together any resources, they do not rebound. This is why there are people still in tents in Haiti. This is why there are parts of New Orleans that have still not recovered from Katrina. There are a few examples of organizations doing things differently. Howard Lutnick of Cantor Fitzgerald decided to adopt 19 schools in Sandy-affected areas. He went in and he gave each of the family $1,000 gift cards, no restrictions. When asked why and how could you do that, he said, these people don't need me to tell them what to do. Maybe they need to buy a new couch. Maybe they need to take their kids to Toys R Us and buy a toy. They know what they need. It's up to them. There's another new organization called Give Directly. Give Directly gives unconditional cash grants to poor families in Africa. They do it for 3 reasons. The first, empowering the poor, and these are their words, empowering the poor to make their own decisions advances our core value of respect. Give Directly rejects the thought that they know better. Second, it allows recipients to purchase the things that they need most, enhancing the overall impact. And third, imposing conditions on the funds requires costly monitoring and enforcement structures to be put in place, taking funds that could otherwise be given to those in need. In response to the lack of aid available to small businesses after the storm, Restore Red Hook raised over $600,000, almost entirely through small local donations, individual donors. We gave out direct grants to 65 businesses, most of them averaging $11,000 each. These businesses represent 400 jobs in Red Hook. For most of these businesses, Restore Red Hook funds were the only organized assistance they received. We were successful in reopening all but 3 businesses. Restore Red Hook is also the only organization in Red Hook that re-granted 100% of the funds it raised and re-granted it right back to the community who was affected. So, when you go through a disaster, you don't only suffer physically or physically, you also suffer psychically. In the days after the storm, I began to notice things that were wonderful during the first week, a free hot meal, a blanket, were far less so in the following weeks. Going through something like this is an experience, it's a complete and total loss of control. So every day that you have to eat a meal that someone else has given you, and you have to sleep with a blanket that someone else said you can have, is another day that you feel your loss of control more deeply. If you can choose what blanket you want, or perhaps decide I don't need a blanket, what I need to do is go and buy a sweater, then you can exercise a little bit. You can begin to get a little more in control of your life. And if each day after you have a disastrous event, you can exercise one more muscle that gets you back moving in the right direction, that's empowerment. That's what people need to recover. You begin to exercise some autonomy and dominion over your life again. The effect and the value are so much greater than the dollars involved. Direct aid is the intersection of what empowers people to recover after a disaster and what is also both efficient, effective in costs and results. Direct aid is what is needed when we have disasters, and that's what I'm hoping you'll support us in. Thank you.